So the first question that comes up is, what is a difficult asthma? Are there any objective ways to define difficult asthma? So if you look at asthma control, there are basically two things that we have to look at when we define asthma control. One, the symptom control. Another important thing that one has to assess while assessing asthma control is the risk factors for poor asthma outcomes. What is symptom control? There are basically four things that you have to look at. One is daytime asthma symptoms, which are more than twice a week. The second thing is the night wakings. Now these things are to be assessed over past 4 weeks, and then you have need for relievers, and that also is more than twice per week. And the fourth thing that we need to assess is an limitation in activity. The other thing is risk factors assessment for poor asthma outcome. There are three of them. First one is risk factors for exacerbation. Second is a risk factor for fixed airflow limitation. Third one is to assess for medication side effects. To actually assess asthma control, you have to assess in both these headings, the symptom control and the assessment of risk factors for poor asthma outcomes. This is a chart from the GINA. If the patient has none of these in the past 4 weeks, he should be labeled as a well-controlled asthma on whatever treatment he is. If he has one or two of these, he should be labeled as partly controlled, and 3 or more of these, he will be labeled as uncontrolled. If you look at risk factors for poor outcomes, they should actually be assessed at the time of diagnosis and thereafter periodically also. FEV1 is a very important factor out of these. If you look at FEV1, it should be assessed at the start of treatment, after 3 to 6 months of treatment to record the patient's personal best, and thereafter it can be assessed periodically for ongoing risk assessment. So as we had discussed, we have to assess for exacerbations, fixed airflow obstruction, and medication side effects. The question that comes up is that based on these 4 symptoms, you can define symptom control, and if a patient the symptoms are controlled, why do we need to assess for the risks? There are 4 reasons for that. One, the symptoms at times can be controlled by placebo also. They may be controlled by inappropriate use of long-acting beta-2 agonist alone. But what it leaves out is this: the underlying airway inflammation is untreated. And as we all know, as long as there is an inflammation which is underlying going on, the patient will be at risk for exacerbations. So they may not have symptoms, but they still are at risk for exacerbations. The symptoms at times may be due to other conditions like lack of fitness. They may be comorbidities such as inducible laryngeal obstruction. This may also create symptoms other than asthma also. Thirdly, patient who is depressed or anxious, the reporting is not likely to be as reliable. And then patients may not have symptoms because probably a sedentary lifestyle, but this low lung function will predispose them to exacerbations. So there is a need to assess for risks of these poor outcomes in addition to the symptoms. What are the risk factors for exacerbation? So first one of them is medication. If a patient is using very high dose of SABA, short-acting beta-2 agonist like salbutamol, it can indicate a worse outcome. For example, if he is using more than 1 canister per month, which has around 200 dose, or more than 12 canister per year, this has a very high chance of landing up in ICU in severe exacerbation, and there is a high chance of death also in these patients. So this in a way is an indicator that this, although the symptom may be controlled, but this is a patient where we need to monitor, we need to watch out. Now second is inadequate inhaled corticosteroids. Somebody who is not being given adequate inhaled corticosteroids, maybe because he has not been prescribed, maybe because he is not adherent to it, maybe the technique is wrong. All these will still predispose a child to risks of exacerbation. Now, there are comorbidities like obesity, chronic rhinosinusitis, GERD, food allergy, and pregnancy. These can also increase the risk for exacerbation in a patient with asthma, even when at times the symptoms may be controlled. Exposures, continued exposure to smoking, passive or even active, exposure to allergens and air pollution, these also are risk factors for exacerbation. Then major psychological or socioeconomic problems also predispose a child to exacerbations. Now if you look at lung functions, as we have just said, a low FEV1 is a risk factor for exacerbation despite seeming symptom control. So if the FEV1 is less than 60% of the predicted and there is a high bronchodilator reversibility, there is a very high chance of exacerbation. And then the blood tests in a patient with type 2 inflammation like blood eosinophils, elevated FeNO, these also indicate a high risk of exacerbation. Other than these, there are two major independent risk factors for exacerbations or flare-ups. One is if he has ever been intubated or has been to ICU because of asthma, and also if he has had one or more severe exacerbation in the past 12 months. These risk factors increase the risk of exacerbations even if they have few asthma symptoms. So if you assess a child based on symptoms alone, then you may still have children who will end up having an exacerbation. So you have to also assess for risks of persistent airflow limitation. If he has a history of preterm birth or a chronic mucus hypersecretion, so these are the risk factors for persistent airflow limitation. Then a lack of inhaled corticosteroids, exposure to smoke, noxious chemicals and occupational exposures, and low FEV1. This also is a risk factor for persistent airflow limitation. And blood and sputum eosinophilia. You have to look for medication side effects which may be systemic, which may be local. A child has been on frequent oral corticosteroids, then he is likely to have these systemic side effects. High dose and potent inhaled corticosteroids, P450 inhibitors, they are also likely to have systemic side effects. Inhaled corticosteroids, especially if the technique is poor, they are more likely to have local side effects like thrush. Now let us look at a hypothetical case. We have an 8-year-old male who is a known case of asthma, and he has been on these drugs. He is using meter dose inhaler budesonide, 200 micrograms, 2 puffs BD. So he is getting 200, 2 puffs twice a day. So this makes out around 800 per day. Fine. He also is on meter dose inhaler salbutamol, 2 puffs SOS, and on assessing symptoms over the past 4 weeks, what we have is daytime cough 3 times per week. Sleep disturbance has been there almost once per week, and he has required these relievers 3 times per week, and he has missed school twice in the last 1 week, and he has had an acute exacerbation in the past 4 months. The patient in this case has had daytime symptoms more than twice a week. Yes, his sleep has been disturbed. He has required relievers more than 3 times per week, and he has missed school, which is an activity limitation. So this child, based on this, will be labeled as uncontrolled. Other than that, if you look at risk factors for poor asthma control, this exacerbation around 4 months back is a risk factor for exacerbation in near future. So this child's assessment should show it as uncontrolled asthma with risk factor for exacerbation also there. So now we have objectively defined that this child is uncontrolled. So how do you approach this? What should be the next step in a child on treatment for asthma and not responding the way you want? The first step should not be the increase of drug or the change of drug. The first step should be, like in any other chronic condition which is not responding the way you want it to respond, the first step should be review your diagnosis. Now the problem is, if you try and define asthma, it's not as clear and objective as one expects it to be. Now asthma, it is the genus definition that we have, and asthma is a heterogeneous disease, and it is characterized by chronic airway inflammation. It is defined by a history of respiratory symptoms like wheeze, like shortness of breath, like chest tightening and cough. So these respiratory symptoms are there, and they vary over time and in intensity. So this is the first part of the definition. It is defined as a history of respiratory symptoms such as wheeze, shortness of breath, chest tightness and cough that vary over time and intensity, together with variable expiratory airflow limitation. So it has two things, the respiratory symptoms and the airflow limitation. Respiratory symptoms also are variable over time and in intensity, and this airflow limitation is also variable. Diagnosis of asthma is a clinical diagnosis based. So if you look at this GINA chart, you need to have a set of symptoms on history and finding on examination which support a diagnosis of an asthma. And if you have these, the next step is to do a pulmonary function test with reversibility test. Now at times the patient may come to you in exacerbation where this PFT may not be feasible. So if there is a clinical urgency and other diagnoses seem unlikely, you can still start the patient on empirical controllers, and then the PFT can be done in the next 1 to 3 months. So what is the role of pulmonary function test? Ideally, a pulmonary function test should be done at the time of diagnosis, before start of treatment. Thereafter, interval spirometries can be done. But in a child who comes to you in flare-up, then this can be deferred, and a spirometry can be done whenever child is relatively stabilized in the interval period. If suppose you have a diagnostic dilemma, the diagnosis is not so clear on your history and examination, then of course it is very important to get a PFT done. And thereafter, the PFT can be done on follow-up to assess risk factors of exacerbation and all. If PFT is available, it should be done. Ideally, it should be done. But if suppose it is not available, then clinically also you can start treatment. The step 2 after confirming the diagnosis is assess the inhaler technique and the choice of inhaler. In children less than 3 years of age, you use a face mask in addition to the MDI and spacer. And in older children more than 3 years of age, you should use a pressure MDI with spacer and a mouthpiece only. You should not use a face mask. Now if you look at the choice of controllers, one thing that we need to remember is it's a shared decision making. You cannot force a patient to take a particular controllers. You have to take his opinion into account. Depending on the patient phenotype, you may choose one particular kind of controller. For example, for aspirin exacerbated respiratory distress, you may suggest leukotriene inhibitors. Now patient preferences also are important. Somebody may say that I would not use steroids. Some people may be more comfortable with a DPI than an MDI. There could be other reasons why you would choose a particular controller over others. One could be practical issues of teaching and learning a technique of MDI. Cost can also be a factor which makes us choose a particular controller over other. You may have to choose a particular device based on considerations of cost, the patient skills. If you are prescribing MDI, then always give a spacer along with that. Now if you encounter a patient of uncontrolled asthma using an MDI, then it is of utmost importance to check the technique at every opportunity. Identify the errors using specific checklists which are available. If you find an error, the next step is to correct, and correction means physical demonstration. They would forget the words, but they will remember the demonstration. So try and physically demonstrate to them how to use an MDI. And once you have taught them, again recheck, again ask them to demonstrate to you. After the technique has been assessed, the next step will be to assess adherence. Now this can be difficult at times. Now in pediatrics, sometimes the parents would say that my child is very intelligent. He takes it very regularly. But if suppose such a child is having uncontrolled asthma, we may have to ask the parents to at least supervise. Then after you have reviewed the diagnosis and you have checked that appropriate medication has been given and it has been adhered to, the next step would be, if the child is failing to thrive, there is no cough, the cough is there but it is wet, there is persistent or high grade fever, there are localized findings like localized or monophonic wheeze, if there is a feeding difficulty, the symptoms started in the neonatal age group, there is stridor. If there are absence of triggers like viral infection, exercise, cold, if a patient has clubbing or hypoxia, if there are features of malnutrition, if there is short stature, diarrhea, ear discharge, severe infection and stridor, the radiology suggests a localized lesion. This also goes against a diagnosis of asthma. So what are the comorbidities that you may find? So one of them is chronic sinusitis or rhinitis. In this, they may have early morning sneezing or nasal itching. They may have running or blocked nose. They may have snoring. They have mouth breathing. Obesity. Now it is associated with difficult asthma, but obesity per se may cause physical deconditioning, and that can cause breathing difficulty. So treatment of obesity can help in management of asthma also. GERD can lead to a nocturnal cough and vomiting. Patients with adenoid hypertrophy have features of obstructive sleep apnea syndrome. They may have ear infection, they may have snoring, blocked nose. Patients who have psychological or psychiatric disorders, asthma control in them is difficult. And then comes the environmental factors. In the management of asthma, control of these environmental factors like smoking, dust, some mosquito repellents, carpet, seepage in one of the walls, keeping a furry pet, but at times it is very difficult to do away with the pet. It provides so much emotional support to a family. But at least what they can do is that the pet will not sleep in the same room as the child. And now we need to upgrade treatment. So how do we upgrade treatment? The objective of treating asthma is to control symptoms and to minimize these risks of poor outcome. Now, like any chronic disease, you have to establish a good patient and doctor partnership. Otherwise, you will not succeed. And managing an asthma is a continuous cycle. So each time a patient comes to you, you assess. Based on your assessment, you adjust treatment, and then after you have adjusted, the patient on follow-up will be reviewed again. Irrespective of whatever stage or step the patient is on, he is assessed, the treatment is adjusted, and the response to that is reviewed. And each time it is of utmost importance to teach and reinforce essential skills like the inhaler skills. You have to reinforce the adherence, and you have to tell about guided self-management education. And it is a good idea to give a written asthma action plan, tell them about self-monitoring and regular medical. So what is an uncontrolled asthma and what is a severe asthma are the same. So as we have just seen, if a patient has lack of symptom control, he is labeled as uncontrolled asthma. And once you go through this grind of confirming the diagnosis again, assessing the inhaler technique and the choice of inhaler, assessing the adherence, ruling out alternative or overlapping diagnosis, identifying and treating comorbidities, controlling the environmental factor, then what you are left with is severe asthma. So the uncontrolled asthma is a bigger chunk, out of which once all these factors have been taken care of, you end up with severe asthma. So diagnosis of severe asthma is a retrospective diagnosis. This is data from a Dutch population survey of patients more than 18 years of age with asthma. The idea why I am presenting this slide is to tell you what is the magnitude of the severe asthma. So of all the patients that were there in this group, almost 24% of them were on step 4 or 5. So what is this step 4 and 5? This step 4 and 5 means at least a medium dose inhaled corticosteroids plus LABA or a high dose inhaled corticosteroids. So 24% were on step 4-5. 17% were on step 4 and 5 with poor symptom control. If we go down further, out of these 17%, only 3.7% despite step 4 and 5 had poor symptom control despite good adherence and inhaler technique. So this number is not as big. So a large chunk of them will not need upgrading drugs for control. So a short word about how can you manage these patients with severe asthma. The one way to do is optimized use of inhaled corticosteroids or LABA, and then you can go to low dose oral corticosteroids, and you can have add-on treatments without phenotyping, and you can have phenotype guided treatment also, and along with that you have to use non-pharmacological interventions. Just to summarize the approach, the first step in a child who looks uncontrolled asthma is to review the diagnosis. The second step, the technique and the choice of inhaler. The third step, adherence. The fourth step, look for alternative or overlapping diagnosis. Fifth step, look for comorbidities, then environmental factor, and in the last we come up with upgradation of treatment. Thank you so much.